Go back to India. The words sliced through the air like broken glass. Karoline Leavitt's voice carried not just the force of a political jab, but the sting of something deeper, something meant to humiliate, to brand, to exile. For a split second, the debate hall transformed. It wasn't just a stage anymore. It was an arena where identity itself was being put on trial. The room fell silent. Cameras caught every twitch, every raised eyebrow, every smirk frozen on Karoline's face. The audience shifted in their seats, caught between shock and disbelief. In that moment, you could almost hear the heartbeat of the nation pulsing through the silence. On one side, the challenger, a young conservative climbing fast, hungry for headlines, armed with sound bites and arrogance. On the other, Kash Patel, son of immigrants, lawyer, public servant, a man who carried decades of service on his shoulders but now stood face to face with a weaponized insult. It wasn't just about two people trading words. It was about belonging, about who gets to call themselves American, about whether the United States is a nation of shared values or a gated club policed by those who shout loudest. The cameras zoomed in. Karoline leaned back with a smirk, basking in the shockwave she had unleashed. It was the kind of moment pundits drool over, the kind of soundbite that trends, that racks up clicks and headlines. She thought she had landed the knockout punch, but across the stage, Patel didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in calculation. The crowd waited for him to lash back, to break the silence with fire. But he didn't. He let the insult hang there, suspended in the heavy air of the hall, letting its ugliness reveal itself. Somewhere in that silence, the balance shifted. This wasn't going to be just another ugly exchange in a political circus. This was something bigger, something raw, something that would ripple far beyond those walls. Because in a nation divided, people weren't just watching a debate. They were watching themselves, their families, their stories reflected in Patel's silence. And then, as he leaned into the microphone, America held its breath. But no one was prepared for what Kash Patel said next. The insult didn't just hang in the air. It reverberated, echoing off the walls of the debate hall, spilling into living rooms and news feeds across the country. This wasn't an offhand gaffe. It was deliberate, a line drawn in the sand by Karoline Leavitt, the young conservative firebrand who built her career on audacity and soundbites sharp enough to pierce headlines. Karoline was no stranger to controversy. She thrived on it. To her supporters, she was the rebel storming the gates, unafraid to say what others won't. To her critics, she embodied the smugness of a political machine that weaponized identity as a wedge. And on that stage, she played her part perfectly. Her words designed to sting not just Patel, but millions who saw themselves in him. The cameras didn't miss it. Neither did the audience at home. For every immigrant who had once been told to go back to where they came from, Karoline's words felt personal. They weren't just an attack on Patel's heritage. They were a dismissal of the sacrifices made by families who crossed oceans for opportunity, who worked night shifts, who believed in the promise etched into America's very foundation. That's why the silence afterward felt heavier than any policy debate or talking point. Because suddenly, this wasn't about tax plans or foreign policy. It was about something rawer, belonging. Who gets to be American? Who decides? And in the echo of Karoline's remark, millions of people who had ever been told they didn't belong felt their own dignity put on trial. This is the real reason her words cut so deep. When you tell someone to go back, you're not just mocking them. You're denying their Americanness. You're erasing their story. And you're exposing the ugliest divide in our country. The clash between those who believe America is defined by bloodline and those who believe it is defined by values. Karoline smiled, convinced she had landed a decisive blow. To her, it was clever. To Patel, it was something else entirely. The trap had been set, but not for him, for her. Because in that moment of smug confidence, she underestimated the power of restraint. She underestimated what happens when dignity refuses to bow to arrogance, and so America watched. Viewers waited for the explosion, for Patel to bite back, to lash out. But instead, they saw something stranger, something they weren't expecting. He stayed still, calm, composed, like a chess player who has already seen 5 moves ahead. It was this composure that transformed the moment from insult to inflection point. Suddenly, people began to wonder, what was he planning to say? How would he answer not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been told to leave the country they call home? In living rooms across the nation, immigrants leaned closer to their screens. Young students whose parents spoke with accents held their breath. Veterans who had once been questioned about their loyalty clenched their fists. Because Patel wasn't just speaking for himself, he was about to carry all of them on his shoulders. Karoline thought she had won the room, but what came next would prove that the stage she tried to control would soon belong entirely to him. What looked like a career-ending insult would soon flip the script entirely. To understand why the insult landed with such venom, you have to understand Karoline Leavitt herself. Young, ambitious, and hungry for the spotlight, she wasn't just another political newcomer. She was the prototype of a new conservative brand. Brash, unapologetic, more influencer than stateswoman. At just 20-something, she had already made waves as a media personality, carving out her lane by leaning into controversy and treating every soundbite as currency. For her, politics wasn't about persuasion, it was about virality. Karoline's rise was meteoric, fueled by the very thing that would later undo her: audacity. She was the kind of figure who could electrify a room of die-hard supporters by saying out loud what others only hinted at. She thrived on the chaos, on the tension, on the very lines she crossed, and she wore that recklessness like a badge of honor. But with every fiery statement, with every smug grin aimed at the cameras, there was a contradiction bubbling beneath the surface. She draped herself in the language of patriotism, love of country, America first, protecting our values, yet her actions told another story. Because in that debate hall, the moment she told Kash Patel to go back to India, she wasn't defending America. She was shrinking it. She was narrowing the definition of who belongs, cutting away at the very fabric she claimed to cherish. That's the thing about Karoline. Her brand of patriotism always came with an asterisk. It was patriotism for some, not for all. Pride in America that excluded the very people who built it, who bled for it, who gave it meaning. And that hypocrisy became her calling card. To her base, it was refreshing candor. To everyone else, it was arrogance masquerading as authenticity. Watch her posture at the podium, the self-assured smirk, the clipped tone, the exaggerated pauses designed to make headlines. This wasn't conviction. It was performance. Karoline knew the cameras were on her, and she fed them exactly what they wanted. A villain audiences could not ignore. The kind who knew outrage translated into attention, and attention translated into power. But here's the truth about empires built on outrage. They burn fast, but they burn out. What Karoline didn't yet understand was that mockery is a weak foundation for greatness. Every empire built on mockery eventually collapses, because eventually arrogance meets its match, not in louder arrogance, but in quiet dignity. Her downfall was already being written in the smug curl of her smile, in the calculated cruelty of her words. She thought Patel was just another opponent, another obstacle to be bulldozed by insult and bravado. But she failed to see that her jab struck a chord far deeper than she imagined. It wasn't just Patel standing across from her. It was millions of Americans who shared his story, his struggle, his pride. And when you insult one, you insult all. That's the fatal flaw of arrogance. It blinds. Karoline believed the cameras loved her. She believed the crowd was with her. She believed she had the upper hand because she could cut deepest and land the sharpest blow. But what she didn't see, what she couldn't see, was how thin that armor really was. Because true patriotism doesn't mock. It doesn't exclude. It doesn't tell people to leave the country they helped build. And though she claimed to defend America, she was exposing herself as someone who misunderstood its very essence. Still, in that moment, she felt invincible. Every debate she had entered before had rewarded her theatrics. Every time she went low, the headlines went high, and the cycle reinforced itself. She had no reason to believe this night would be any different. So when she told Kash Patel to go back to India, she thought she had scored the knockout line, the one that would dominate coverage for days. She didn't know she had just handed him the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to show the country exactly who he was and who she wasn't. Because for every villain, there must be a hero. For every insult, a reckoning. And for every empire built on arrogance, a moment comes when truth demands its due. That moment was coming. But who exactly was the man she mocked? To understand the weight of Kash Patel's words, you have to understand the man who spoke them. He didn't rise to that stage out of privilege or entitlement. He didn't inherit a legacy of wealth or power. His story, like so many American stories, began with parents who arrived on these shores carrying little more than faith in the promise of opportunity. Kash's parents came from India, strangers in a new land, chasing a dream that had no guarantees. They worked jobs most people overlooked. Long hours, low pay, and endless sacrifice. His father took shifts that bled into each other, sometimes working through weekends just to keep the lights on. His mother managed the household with quiet strength, instilling discipline and resilience in her children. There were no shortcuts, no safety nets, just grit, determination, and the belief that hard work could carve out a future. As a boy, Kash often felt the sting of being different. On playgrounds, he was mocked for his lunch, his skin, his parents' accents. He learned early how cruel words could be. Words like the very insult Karoline hurled at him decades later. But each time he came home, his parents reminded him of a truth deeper than the cruelty of classmates. That America was his home, and he had every right to claim it. That belief propelled him. He buried himself in his studies, chasing excellence not for applause, but because failure was never an option. Every test he aced, every degree he earned, was a tribute to the sacrifices his parents had made. And slowly, his path sharpened into purpose. He studied law, not because it was lucrative, but because it was a way to serve, to defend justice, to give back to the country that had demanded so much, yet offered so much more. His career wasn't glamorous, but it was grounded in service. He worked in national security, counterterrorism, and law enforcement, roles that placed him in the shadows, where victories are often invisible but no less vital. While others built careers out of sound bites and self-promotion, Patel built his out of sweat and sacrifice. His job was to protect Americans, even those who would never know his name, even those who might tell him he didn't belong. That's the contrast. Karoline Leavitt sought the spotlight, chasing viral moments and headlines. Patel avoided it, choosing instead the grind of public service where the cameras rarely linger. One thrived on arrogance, the other on duty. One measured success in the attention, the other in quiet impact. And yet, when the moment came, it was Patel's story, rooted in sacrifice, that carried the weight of truth. Because his life embodied Americanness in its purest form. Not loud declarations, but lived commitment. Not exclusion, but inclusion. Not mockery, but dignity. To humanize him is to see the boy sitting at a kitchen table late at night. Textbooks open while his father dozed in exhaustion after another double shift. To see the young man walking across a graduation stage, his mother wiping tears from her eyes, knowing every sleepless night had been worth it. To see the public servant working quietly in government halls, bearing the burden of responsibility. With steadiness, that's what made Karoline's insult sting so deeply, and why it backfired so spectacularly. Because when she told Patel to go back, she wasn't just dismissing him. She was dismissing the millions whose stories mirrored his. The families who sacrificed for their children, the immigrants who believed in America even when America didn't always believe in them, the men and women who proved, through hard work and service, that belonging is earned not by ancestry, but by action. Patel's journey wasn't about proving himself to cynics like Karoline. It was about honoring his parents' faith, about living up to the ideals etched into the Constitution, and that journey prepared him for the moment when his identity would be mocked on a national stage. Because unlike his opponent, he didn't need arrogance to stand tall. He had experience, he had sacrifice, he had truth. And it was this journey that prepared him for the moment that shocked America. The insult had landed, but the night was far from over. In fact, the real drama was only just beginning. The debate hall buzzed with a strange electricity, the kind that hums through the air when an entire audience senses they're about to witness something unforgettable. Karoline Leavitt, riding the adrenaline of her own provocation, wasn't done. She doubled down. Her smirk widened as she adjusted the microphone, tilting her head with exaggerated confidence. "Look," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of performative certainty that belongs less to a stateswoman and more to a reality star. "This is America. If you can't handle that truth, maybe this isn't the place for you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some in her base applauded, hungry for the red meat. She tossed their way, but many others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The divide was visible. This wasn't policy. It was a spectacle. Karoline played directly to the cameras, pausing between phrases as if to give headline writers their sound bites in real time. Every gesture, every smirk, was designed for virality. Across the stage, Kash Patel sat still. His face betrayed nothing. His posture, steady as stone, contrasted sharply with Karoline's restless theatrics. Where she flailed with bravado, he measured each breath. But inside, the tension simmered. His parents' journey, his own sacrifices, every slight he had endured in quiet dignity, it all pressed against him, demanding release. The crowd waited for the explosion, and that was the brilliance of it. The silence. Patel's composure didn't weaken him. It amplified him. Each second he refused to lash out, each pause in which he chose dignity over rage, the insult that Karoline thought would diminish him, only grew uglier in comparison. She looked petty. He looked unshakable. But the tension kept building. The audience wasn't just passive. They were caught up in the drama. You could almost hear their inner questions. Would he snap? Would he raise his voice? Would he return insult for insult? Or would he show them something they had never seen before? Karoline, sensing the silence was no longer hers, pressed harder. "It's simple," she added, with mock sympathy, shrugging her shoulders as if she were the voice of reason. "We're tired of people who don't share our values trying to rewrite what America stands for. If you love this country, you prove it, or you leave." This time there was no applause. Her words fell flat, echoing in the uneasy stillness of the room. A shift had happened. The spectacle was starting to curdle into cruelty, and everyone could feel it. The line between boldness and arrogance had blurred, and Karoline had crossed it. Patel's eyes remained fixed, unblinking. He didn't rise to her bait, didn't interrupt, didn't flail. The cameras caught every frame of his restraint, magnifying it, turning silence into suspense. It was cinematic, almost scripted, as if the story had been written long before either of them stepped onto that stage. The moderators shifted awkwardly, sensing the imbalance. The crowd leaned forward, the weight of anticipation thick in the air. Patel's stillness had become unbearable, like the held breath before a storm. Every viewer at home could feel it too. The unmistakable sense that something was about to give, that they were standing at the edge of a turning point. Would he fire back in anger or rise above? The tension demanded an answer. And then he leaned into the microphone. The room held its breath as Kash Patel leaned toward the microphone. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply adjusted the mic with a steady hand, his composure radiating like a man who had carried the weight of harder battles than this one. The silence was deafening, and in that silence Karoline's smirk faltered just slightly, as if even she sensed something was shifting. Patel began slowly, each word measured, deliberate. "You know," he said, his tone calm, almost conversational, "I've heard those words before. Go back." He paused, letting the phrase hang in the air, its ugliness exposed to everyone listening. "I heard them as a kid on the playground, when other children didn't understand my parents' accents. I heard them whispered in classrooms when teachers assumed I wasn't from here. I heard them shouted on streets when my skin marked me as different." The crowd stirred. Heads nodded. Eyes softened. He wasn't just answering an insult. He was telling a story that countless Americans had lived themselves. Patel's calmness was disarming, his restraint more powerful than any shouted comeback. "But I also heard something else," he continued. His voice firmed, gaining strength like a rising tide. "I heard my father's alarm clock at 5 a.m. when he got up to work shifts most people wouldn't take. I heard my mother's voice, reminding me every night that hard work was the path to dignity. And I heard the sound of our flag being raised at school every morning, reminding me that this country was my home." The cameras zoomed in. Karoline's grin stiffened, her eyes darting briefly, betraying the unease creeping into her confidence. She had expected rage, a sparring match of insults. Instead, Patel was pulling the ground out from beneath her feet, brick by brick, replacing her cruelty with dignity. Patel leaned in closer. "I studied the law because I believed in justice. I joined public service because I believed America could be better. I worked in counterterrorism, I prosecuted criminals. I fought to keep Americans safe, not because someone told me I had to, but because I wanted to give back to the nation that gave everything to my family. The crowd broke into applause, loud, rolling, insistent. The moderator attempted to quiet them, but the clapping refused to die down. Patel simply waited, calm, steady, letting the validation echo through the hall. When it quieted, he continued, voice unwavering. So when you tell me to go back, I need you to understand something. He paused. Silence thickened again, like the air before lightning. There is no back. This is my country. This is my only home. And I have proven my love for it in ways that cannot be questioned. The audience erupted once more, this time with cheers, whistles, a standing ovation from pockets of the crowd. Karoline shifted uncomfortably, her smirk gone, her shoulders tightening under the weight of the room turning against her. Patel didn't stop. His words now carried momentum, rolling forward with the energy of history itself. My family sacrificed everything to be here. They believed in the American dream when it wasn't handed to them, when every door was heavier, when every opportunity had to be fought for. And we never asked for pity. We asked for fairness, for dignity, for the chance to prove ourselves through service. That's what it means to be American. The applause grew louder, chants of USA breaking out in corners, of the hall, ironic and poetic in equal measure. The very chant, often weaponized against people who looked like Patel, now rang out in his defense, a chorus reclaiming patriotism from those who tried to hoard it. Karoline stared at her podium, blinking, unsure whether to interject or remain quiet. Every attempt to smirk now seemed hollow, every flicker of bravado exposed as performance. In real time, the confidence that had fueled her rise crumbled under the weight of Patel's authenticity. Then came the final strike, the line that would replay endlessly on social media, in news coverage, and in living rooms across America. Patel lowered his voice, almost a whisper, forcing the crowd to lean in. I am as American as anyone in this room, and no one can tell me otherwise. The explosion of applause was instantaneous. People leapt to their feet. Phones shot into the air, recording, live streaming, capturing history as it unfolded. Hashtags were born in that instant. Patel's words weren't just a rebuttal. They were a declaration, one that millions of Americans would soon repeat as their own. Karoline glanced nervously toward the moderators, but they offered no lifeline. This was no longer her stage. The spotlight had shifted, and it wasn't coming back. Her empire of mockery had collapsed in a single moment of dignity. Patel raised his chin slightly, acknowledging the crowd, but not basking in it. His calm demeanor hadn't cracked once. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't lashed out, hadn't played her game. And yet he had won decisively, because he showed something more powerful than arrogance. Quiet, unshakable pride. The chant of Patel. Patel! Began in one corner of the hall and spread like wildfire. It was the sound of validation, of belonging, of millions of silenced voices suddenly seeing themselves reflected in him. Karoline's silence screamed louder than any insult she could muster now. The moderators finally restored order, but the night was no longer the same. The insult meant to diminish Patel had elevated him beyond anything a campaign strategist could script. He wasn't just a debater anymore. He had become a symbol. And as the applause finally dimmed, the country sensed something bigger was happening, something that would ripple far beyond that stage, beyond the hall, beyond the headlines. But the ripple effects were only just beginning. The debate ended, but the moment had only just begun. Within seconds of Patel's final words, "I am as American as anyone in this room," clips of the exchange shot across the internet like sparks igniting dry grass. The video flooded Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. It wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. The hashtag #IamAmerican exploded overnight. Millions reposted Patel's calm, dignified takedown, splicing it with their own faces, their own voices, their own stories. Children of immigrants held up family photos. Veterans spoke of loyalty questioned but never broken. College students shared the accents of their parents, turning what once felt like a burden into a badge of pride. Suddenly, Patel's words were no longer just his. They belonged to the nation. Memes followed. Screenshots of Karoline's smug grin, juxtaposed with Patel's steady composure, circulated with captions like "confidence versus dignity," "arrogance meets its match," and the devastatingly simple, "This is America." The internet, in its chaotic creativity, had chosen a victor. But the shockwaves didn't stop online. Cable networks looped the exchange on repeat, dissecting it frame by frame. Conservative commentators scrambled, some defending Karoline, others distancing themselves from the ugliness of her remark. Progressive outlets hailed Patel as a new symbol of resilience, with pundits declaring the moment a cultural reset in the debate over what it means to be American. Even more surprising was the chorus of voices from across the spectrum. A Republican veteran tweeted, "I fought alongside Americans who looked just like Kash Patel. No one gets to tell them they don't belong." A Democratic congresswoman posted, "Tonight, Patel didn't just defend himself, he defended all of us." Athletes, actors, and musicians chimed in, their words amplifying the message until it felt less like a political skirmish and more like a cultural movement. Karoline, once riding high on her brand of fearless candor, now found herself in the crosshairs of ridicule. Editorials condemned her remark as cruel and un-American. Former allies urged her to apologize, warning that arrogance had a cost. Instead, she doubled down in interviews, insisting she was just telling the truth. But each attempt only deepened the backlash. The more she spoke, the smaller she seemed. Meanwhile, Patel's stature grew. Invitations poured in from major networks. Profile pieces framed him not as a politician, but as a symbol of something larger: the quiet strength of immigrant families, the unshakable pride of service, the enduring promise of Americanness. Overnight, he had become not just a debater, but a vessel for millions who saw their own reflection in his restraint. What made the moment so powerful was the collective catharsis it unleashed. For generations, countless Americans had swallowed the sting of being told to go back. They had carried it in silence, burying the pain behind smiles, degrees, uniforms, and hard work. And now, here was a man who didn't just push back. He transformed that insult into a declaration of belonging so undeniable, so unflinching, that it gave millions permission to breathe, to feel seen, to feel American without condition. It was more than politics. It was personal. Social media became a confessional, a celebration, a chorus. Stories poured out. Parents who worked double shifts, grandparents who risked everything for a better life, children born in this country who had, nevertheless, been treated as outsiders. Patel's words became their words. His victory became theirs. And so, the balance of power shifted. Karoline, once the confident provocateur, now stood isolated, her empire of mockery crumbling under the weight of public scorn. Patel, by contrast, was elevated, not by shouting, not by spectacle, but by dignity. As the dust settled, one lesson became undeniable. In the days that followed, Kash Patel's words were replayed so many times they seemed to etch themselves into the fabric of the national conversation. But what gave them power wasn't just the eloquence or the calm delivery. It was the truth. They carried a truth that stretched far beyond one man, one insult, one debate. Patel reframed the wound into a lesson. America is not defined by ancestry. It is not owned by one group or inherited like property passed down through bloodlines. America is defined by service, by sacrifice, by shared values lived out in the small and great ways people give to their communities. That was the heartbeat. Behind his response, the moral clarity that cut through the noise. He turned what was meant to exclude into something expansive. He transformed an insult meant to shrink him into a declaration that enlarged the meaning of citizenship itself. By saying, "I am as American as anyone in this room," Patel wasn't only defending himself, he was defending the janitor who works the night shift in a strange new land, the soldier who wears the uniform, though their last name is hard to pronounce, the nurse who speaks with an accent but holds a patient's hand in the darkest hour. He was defending all of them. That is why the moment resonated so deeply. Because dignity beats hate. Always. The sneer fades, the insult crumbles, but dignity lingers. Quiet, steady, unshakable. In that debate hall, Patel showed that the most powerful response to arrogance is not more arrogance, but grace rooted in conviction. The irony was undeniable. Karoline tried to narrow the circle of belonging, but Patel widened it. She tried to push him out, but he pulled millions in. She mocked, and he inspired. And in that contrast, the audience saw the difference between smallness and greatness, between a politics of exclusion and a politics of service. This wasn't just Patel's victory, one columnist wrote. It was America's. And it felt true, because in his restraint, in his story, in his declaration, Patel reminded the nation of its own ideals, the ones etched into founding documents, the ones so often betrayed but never fully extinguished. That Americanness is not fragile, not gated, not conditional. It is expansive. It belongs to anyone willing to serve, to sacrifice, to believe in the idea of a shared future. The moral of that night was not about who won a debate. It was about what kind of nation we choose to be. Do we let arrogance and insult define us, or do we rise to the dignity of our better angels? Patel didn't just answer Karoline, he answered that question. And millions responded with a resounding yes, but this was not the end. In fact, it was only the beginning. Because moments like these do not vanish when the cameras turn off. They echo, they ripple, they demand reflection. So what do we take from this moment? It began with an insult. Sharp, ugly, meant to wound. Go back to India. Those words were supposed to cut Kash Patel down, to brand him as an outsider in the very country he served. Instead, they ignited a moment that America will not forget. What was meant to humiliate became a turning point, a declaration, a reminder of what this nation truly is. Because Patel did not meet arrogance with arrogance. He met it with dignity. He took a remark that tried to push him out and transformed it into an affirmation that pulled millions in. In his calm, steady voice, he reframed what it means to belong. That America is not defined by ancestry, but by service, sacrifice, and shared values. And that is the lesson we carry forward. Arrogance fades. Dignity lasts. History remembers not the smirk that mocked, but the strength that endured. If you watched Patel on that stage and felt your chest tighten with pride, if you thought of your parents, your grandparents, your own journey, and felt seen, then you know this moment is bigger than politics. It is about who we are as a nation. So here is the call. If you believe America is for all of us, share this story. Let others hear it, feel it, claim it as their own. And if you stand with dignity, if you believe in an America defined by inclusion and service, then subscribe and join this community. Because moments like this deserve more than applause. They deserve a movement. Patel's words belong to all of us now. And together, we carry them forward.